South Africa, because in South Africa, 1 in 4 black South Africans, and this is not anything racially motivated statement, 1 in 4 black South Africans has admitted males to have raped someone.
Whew.
So 1 in 4 men in South Africa of black heritage have admitted they've at some point raped somebody.
And they're walking the streets.
And they're walking the streets.
Yeah.
And 8 out of 9 attempted rapes are not even reported to the police.
Yeah.
So you have a situation where 25% of the black population, male population, has admitted rape, and almost 90% of the rapes that take place go unreported. So you have a situation where you would assume that she would perhaps bring in some outsiders to help with the school, but she refused to. She wanted to make it a black endeavor. She screened them. She wanted to make it a black endeavor. So from the beginning, there were problems at the school. Initially, a black student, brought in a dead baby in her backpack into the school. So she came to school, and there was blood coming out of her backpack, and the students all started screaming. She had brought a baby in the backpack to school, her dead baby in the backpack to school.
Wow.
So that was in the first year. In the next year, there were a dozen cases of financial wrongdoing in the school, where teachers were embezzling, the principal was embezzling loads of money. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars of Oprah's money. The teachers and the staff were just stealing, just literally stealing. So, things got worse, though. But it got worse in year 3, when a total of 23 allegations were brought against 4 of the school teachers during a 6-month period during that year. The allegations of rape, sexual molestation, sexual abuse, where rape with a broomstick in a closet by a janitor. I mean, it was a pretty horrific story. Ultimately, there was a 3-month-long joint investigation between Oprah Winfrey's team of legal experts in the United States, as well as South Africa's police, and a total of 13 counts of sexual assault and sexual abuse were filed by the state against staff in the school. So 13 people were actually prosecuted for rape and sexual assault in the school that was opened less than 3 years earlier.
And how big of a school is this? How many students and staff approximately?
I think there were somewhere in the vicinity of 50 to 75 staff. So we're talking about, about 1/4 of the staff were directly involved.
Oh,
so it's a massive, and this is not counting the embezzlement in the first year. There was embezzlement as well, and there was a dead baby brought into the school. The fact that in South Africa, almost 4,000 rapes occur every single day.
Yeah. This must be the rape capital of the world, I guess.
It is, and 40% of all South African women, black and white, will be raped in their lifetime. So we're talking about it's a serious problem here, and it's a problem in the black. What's most frustrating for me is the fact that South Africa has the most rapes per capita of any nation on earth, and this is something that Oprah must have known this. Obviously, I mean, if she's done any digging whatsoever, she would know that rape is a major issue in South Africa. Actually, 3,600 rapes occur in the country every single day of the week. Wow. And statistics show that 40% of all South African women will be raped in their lifetime. And 41% of the rapes in the country, this is even more important, 41% of the rapes in the country are actually perpetrated against children under the age of 12. And the vast majority of these, over 98% of all convicted rapists in South Africa are, guess what? Black. Facts. These are the facts.
Black men, I guess.
Black men and black women, believe it or not. 92% of all black children in South Africa are actually raped. 92% of all black children in South Africa will be sexually assaulted in their lifetime.
92% of children in their lifetime. Wow.
Yeah. And unfortunately, in South Africa, that black women also rape. I mean, it's a country of just incredible practices. I mean, there's something called lesbian corrective rape in South Africa, where gangs of black men will patrol the townships, and they will target women who they believe are lesbian. So they could have short hair, they could be wearing pants. And when I say target, I don't mean target to throw stones at. They target them for rape and sometimes for murder. So it's called lesbian corrective rape. So
they're trying to straighten them out, make them straight by raping them. Is that the idea?
Yeah,
that's the logic.
Precisely. Yeah, and interestingly, you hear nothing about this in the West. Women are complaining about the patriarchy in the West and how American white college students are all potential rapists, when in reality it's like a ridiculously small number.
It's the opposite.
yeah, of college students are raped in the United States. But you have a country here where you know a massive percentage of the children are going to be raped. They're always raped by black men. 1 in 4 black men admits to raping women. They rape lesbians. Supposedly the group that the left cares so much about, the lesbians, don't seem to matter when they're in South Africa and they're being raped for sports, for all
Wow.
intents and
Can I
purposes. So
ask
it's a
the women who rape, are they raping women, raping younger women? Are they lesbians raping women? What's the statistics on black women raping?
About 8% of all children in South Africa who are raped by black women. So I haven't, I don't really know what that means exactly. I'm assuming it means some sort of penetration. I hate to be graphic on the air. Some form of penetration. I'm assuming the vast majority of those cases will be young girls, but I don't know. But
Yeah.
rape can be obviously many things. You can be a woman in rape, and therefore you would use your hand or some kind of an object to rape a child. It's disgusting. I hate even talking about it. But
Yeah.
but the fact remains that it is a black problem in South Africa. And coming back to the original point of the discussion, Oprah Winfrey, she would have known this. If she'd done any research whatsoever, she would have known this. Yeah, I mean, but South Africa is it's in crisis mode. The country. I mean, we're talking about, and we're not even talking about the thousands and thousands of whites being killed in South Africa every year. It's incredibly. So you're more likely to be killed in South Africa as a white person than you are as a farmer in South Africa than you are if you join the military and go fight in Afghanistan. I mean,
It's
it's
true.
extremely dangerous country that the media is entirely hiding. They're hiding the
Yeah.
facts.
Yeah, it's a
So
country in crisis. Crisis here, crisis there, everywhere in South
it
Africa.
is, yeah.
It's falling apart.
It is, and interestingly, I corresponded a few years ago with a guy named Isaac Mangena. He's an African guy, a black guy, from the Human Rights Commission in South Africa. He's had loads of problems with the ANC, and he's had some run-ins with Jacob Zuma's ANC administration. And he wrote an article, which I republished on my site, which is a nationalist site, and he's black, about how rape is a cultural problem within the black South African community. This is an article written by a black South African named Isaac Mangena, and I read this article when I was doing research for this story, and I came across this article. I thought to myself, it's marvelous. I mean, he blamed black African culture on the rape crisis, and he was shut out
Wow.
by the ANC. And he and I communicated via email a few times, and then we had
Wow.
a nice Skype chat, and then I started promoting some of his work. And I've seen him in the news recently again. He's at the fore of trying to bring the plight of the white South Africans to the attention of the international media. So he's a good man. There are some good people in South Africa who are black as well, obviously. But
Yeah.
unfortunately, it is a cultural thing. South Africans in general, black South Africans, it's a barbaric country. And I guess I can leave you with another little anecdote. Last year, there were tens of thousands of instances of dog rape in South Africa, where in townships, black males in gangs will go and target stray dogs for rape. I'm not joking. Just Google it.
Well, I wonder why. Why would they want to do that?
Again,
Uh,
you just Google it. I mean, this is a fact. I actually
Barbaric.
found this story. I found this story on a left-wing website about rape of animals when I was researching the story in South Africa, and they concealed the identity of the group. So I did a little reading. I found the organization I think it was in Belgium or the Netherlands, if I remember correctly, that was investigating the dog rape in South Africa. I wrote them an email, and they confirmed that it was in the townships. So we all know who lives in the townships. So yeah, we're talking about thousands of dogs raped to death in many occasions by gangs of black males.
It's incredible. It's almost unbelievably barbaric.
Yeah. Barbaric is the right word. And we're told about the Rainbow Nation, and I guess I would leave the audience with just the thought. Just picture what your country's going to look like when the people from these countries ultimately take over your countries. It will be the same thing. We'll be importing third world culture into the West, and we're eventually going to have third world problems.
Yeah. Well, they have Alcoholics Anonymous there in South Africa. Maybe they should start Rape Anonymous in South Africa.
Yeah, perhaps. I just don't think that they see it as a problem.
Yeah. My
I mean, if
gosh.
if 1 in 4 men publicly admits that they've raped a woman, I mean, in the United States, I would think most rapists would probably deny that they raped anybody. Very few would
Yeah.
say, "Yeah, I've done it. I'm so proud of it." I don't think so. But in South Africa, I've seen interviews where I can understand a bit of a few South African languages because of my background, and I've seen videos where men have come out and they're smiling and they'll say, "Yeah, of course, I don't see the big deal. It didn't really impact her either way." Uh,
Wow.
yeah. There was a case where there was a black police officer who raped hundreds of women. He would literally pull up in his police car, offer the women rides home, saying it was dangerous or it was late at night. Whites and black women, literally hundreds. And he raped, over a 3-year period, several hundred women.
Wow. Did he get charged after that?
He did. You can Google it. I don't remember his name anymore, but you can Google. It's a
Wow.
black police officer I think the majority of the women he raped were black, but I'd say he did rape several dozen white women as well. So,
Compare this to white European society. I think it's a lower society. That's my conclusion.
yeah, I mean, what I think is most troubling for me is that it's fine if it's over there. We don't have to deal with it, and I'm not really too bothered. In some ways I am, because I have the connection I have with the country. But if it doesn't come here, it's not that big of a problem for us. But it's coming here, and this is the problem. That this sort of, remember, when you import people, you don't just import them. You import their cultures, their family, their background,
Good
their
point.
mentality, and you also import their experiences and how they view the world. So when you import someone in from Afghanistan, their regard for human life is very different than someone from Ireland or from
Yeah.
Sweden, because they live in a war zone. So understandably, the way they view the human life, it's very different than the way we view human life. When you import people from Africa, where rape is common, 1 in 4 men in South Africa, so it's not just a stereotype. They're going to then see all these white girls and think, well, 1 in 4 of those men might think it's fine to rape one of them. And this, again, this is not racially motivated. This is just facts. I mean, the statistics are there for people who want to find
Yeah.
them. And you're not racist for pointing out truths and for wanting to protect your country. And that's the biggest shame in this, is that I think in my lifetime, I hopefully have 40, 50 years left. I think in my lifetime, we're going to see war zones in our own countries. We're going to see the same sorts of problems we find in South Africa and Afghanistan on the streets. I mean, right now we find it in pockets, we find it in large
Yeah.
cities, and we find the problems here and there, but we don't find it across the board. Like where I live, we don't have anything like that. But I think within 3-4 decades, we're going to find, across the board wholesale problems like what they experienced in South Africa.
Yeah, I agree. I accept there's lots of different types of societies in the world, and that's the way it is. We can run our own society, but I wouldn't want that in mix with our society. Why do we deserve that? And that's just the way the world is. There's lots of diversity in the world. So, but yeah, I agree. Keep it there.
Yeah, keep it there. I mean, again, it would trouble me to no end to know that I would leave my daughter and perhaps my granddaughter in the world. I don't have a granddaughter yet, obviously, but I would, if I have grandchildren, leave them in a world where they're going to walk down the street and face being raped. I mean, the idea that they can be raped on a college campus by a white drunken student is almost ridiculous. It's a ridiculous notion. Can it happen? Certainly. How often does it happen? I
Rare.
mean, I went to university for 5 years. I don't recall even one instance hearing about even a rape on campus. Never once.
Yeah.
5
Yeah.
years at the same university, never once heard of a case of race. But I'm sorry, case of rape. But in South Africa, rape is as common as people changing their clothes.
It is like a cancer. It is. And at the moment, it's expressing itself something terrible in South Africa. The rate of rape and murder and what have you is just phenomenal. I saw some of those papers that you had in your hand, and it said elderly couple shot, whatever. And I couldn't help but think to myself, that's not a good example. With all due respect, the good examples are the elderly couple that had boiling water poured over them, or the elderly gentleman who recently got locked up in his Ford truck and trussed up, and then the truck set on fire and burned to death. Or the little girl who was raped, the 4-year-old girl who was raped by 3 men, survived it. And because she survived, this was proven in the post-mortem autopsy, she was then bundled up in newspaper with gasoline poured over it and then set on fire. Or the girl who was crucified on her parents' kitchen table and then raped, a 3-year-old girl in this instance, a 3-year-old girl raped by 4 men while crucified to her parents' kitchen table after her father had had his throat slit and her mother had been killed as well. It is beyond people's imagination what we're in at the moment. Yeah, absolutely. The best source on this is Dr. Gregory Stanton of Genocide Watch of Washington, D.C., who's written extensively about this. And there's nobody in the world who compares to him as an expert on genocide. And he said that clearly we are heading towards an open genocide. I think that the key thing for people to understand, Alex, is the statistics rather than the sentiment, the opinion. You know, the reality is that the chances of a white farmer in South Africa being murdered on his farm are more than double the chances of a policeman in this violent society being killed. Now, when a man who tills the soil stands more than twice the chance of a crime fighter in a violent society dying, then you know that there's something wrong. The statistical likelihood of a white person being murdered by a black person in South Africa is more than 12,000% higher than any black person in the USA ever stood of being lynched. We're not condoning lynching. We're saying get a sense of perspective, people.
The persecution of whites in Africa, the persecution of whites in Africa is larger than persecution statistically that's been done to blacks in this country.
By more than 12,000%, that's correct.
I was wondering, how do they go about calculating these the murder rates? Because I know you've mentioned before that it's hard to trust the numbers from the government itself. So you know, I know that there are people who have done estimates out there, but how reliable do you think those are?
I think that some of them are very unreliable, Matthew. In fact, I know. You know, what we've endeavored to do is to use the most conservative figures available. The government has an official policy now, and has had for some years, of not releasing statistics based upon race. So in other words, you cannot find out precisely how many white farmers have been murdered, because the government won't do it that way. So what we've done is endeavored to take the most conservative statistics and then do the calculations based on them. When I was in the USA, I spoke extensively about figures, for example, that it's 1,300 and odd % more likely for a white person in South Africa to be murdered by a black person than it is for any American to ever be murdered by anybody. Now, that's not something that we sucked out of our thumb. When we were in the USA, a young mechanical engineer, being a mechanical engineer, you can imagine he's adept with, you know, the old mathematics, volunteered to collate some statistics for us. And what he went to was the most conservative sources. And he brought them back to us and he said, right, can I use this source, this source, this source, and that source? We said, yes, please do, because they're not exaggerated, they're not hysterical, they're not propagandist, they're really conservative. He went away and then he made comparisons with the death rate of American soldiers in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Vietnam. He made comparisons with the murder rate through lynchings of black people in the South, in the USA, 50, 60, 70 years ago. All of those statistics were generated not by us, but by this young American man. And he sent us the results, and we looked through them, and we changed a few things. And there were one or two errors, just simple errors. And he revised them, and then he sent them back to us. And then we revised a couple more things. And the third set is about as reliable as you're ever going to get anywhere in the world. It's mathematically sound. And it is based upon conservative sources. Now, I'd like to point out to you that at the moment we're having a very serious conversation with a major fundraising organization in the USA. And they are prudent, sensible, cautious people. And they said to us, would you mind sending us all of your statistics? Which we did. And they got back to us and they said, 8 people in our office have reviewed all of these statistics. And nobody has been able to come up with any flaw, any error, anything. Finally, I'd like to mention to you that recently Faith Goldie asked me a similar question offline. It wasn't in an interview or anything like that. And we went through this same thing of reviewing mathematics based upon original sources. So if I may say so, with that in mind, I'd like to believe that our statistics, these crazy claims that we make of 24,000% more likely than this and 12,000% more likely than that, are 100% reliable. All I'm saying is we have to try to tell the truth and try to get beyond this kind of tendency to exaggerate things.
Indeed. I mean, there's certainly something to be said about facts and also who you can trust in this day and age, because of course data, everyone wants to take the data that best puts their position into the light.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is rough, but on the other hand, what I've learned is that data only goes so far in convincing people. And, you do hear these stories, and I think a lot of the stories that come out are what really shake people, It's not just that there are murders, it's that you hear these stories about, a husband's, eyelids getting cut off so that he has to watch his children and wife be murdered, and he can't close his eyes.
Yeah.
And I read another one, I think, on the Daily Mail that was about some kind of cannibalism that was happening.
300 odd cannibals in one village. 370 or something. I forget the exact number, but I'm pretty sure it was, if not 370, it was close to it.
So help me with this. That's not sensationalizing the situation.
No. There's the famous story of the young girl who was raped by 4 men and then bundled up in newspaper and set alight. There's another similarly famous story of a young girl who was crucified to her kitchen table, her parents' kitchen table, and raped by 3 men, I think it was. There's a story of a Danish girl who was raped by 8 men in a suburb that I lived in at the time that I was living there. I'm with some people right now who are sitting outside of this room who were chatting to me about the murder of one of their friends' fathers and how he was tortured before he was murdered. And another friend of theirs, a woman, was tortured for something like 4 hours before her husband came home, and he was shot in the chest, and then she was killed too. There are thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of similar stories. There's a story quite recently of a farmer who was trussed up and thrown into his pickup truck, and the doors were locked. He was trussed up, and then the truck was set on fire, and he burned to death while they watched him burn. And we could go on all day. At Elon Musk's former high school, recently a woman was raped with a broomstick so badly that she died from the internal bleeding. This is not drama or melodrama or histrionics. This is real life in the real world for those people who go through it. My own father was made to kneel, and they put the gun to his head and pulled the trigger twice, and twice it misfired. Everybody has a story. There's a young American blogger who was out here recently, coming to see for herself whether all of these stories are true, and she was just blown away. And I showed her a scar on my back from a bad wound, and I was hit by an axe, a separate incident, and on the side of my skull here, in a famous suburb called Yeovil, where there's a lot of violence, a lot of crime. My skull was broken, and it's never really healed. There are fissures all across it. So these things are true, whether people like it or they don't like it, whether it's convenient or inconvenient, whether it's politically correct or not politically correct, whether Hillary Clinton likes the sound of what we're saying or not, whether black people feel that it casts aspersions on the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, doesn't change. It doesn't matter. These are actual events.
It's really hard to believe. Like, a lot of people, I think, they just want to find some way to not look at what this is, and I think the racial component is a big reason for that. You know, because a lot of people, they might say, well, maybe this is just, you know, cultural, maybe this is just the way South Africa is, or something like that. And but of course, the majority of these farmers, right, they're all white. I know there are probably some black farmers, but the majority of the victims that we're talking about are white, correct?
Yes. Just to give you a sense of perspective, Matthew, the farm ownership proportion in South Africa is 74% white, 26% black. I'm talking about commercial farms, not lands owned. Obviously, many black people own many lands, pieces of land, property in the in remote areas in South Africa, rural areas, traditional black African homelands, and so on. But they're not commercial farms. We're talking strictly about commercial farms. If we were to include non-commercial farms, then the percentage of black ownership is much higher. But even as it is, in terms of commercial farms, the percentage owned by black people is 26%. But the percentage of murder of commercial farmers is approaching 100%. It's well over 95%, 97 point some change. I'm trying to speak from memory. White. So clearly, there is a racial motive. Not because I say so, not because I want it to be so, not because Matthew Drake is a raving, rabid racist, not because Donald Trump is a bad man, but because it's a mathematical fact.
Right.
It's a mathematical fact that the preponderance of these crimes is perpetrated upon white people in contravention of...
And they're a minority. They're a minority as well.
Yeah, we're about 8.5% of the population.
That's what I thought, yeah. I think I wrote down 5 million whites, roughly.
Yeah, we're just under 5 million. 5 million is the closest round number, yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, there are people that are talking about... I mean, I know you mentioned Gregory Stanton of Genocide Watch, who was saying this is, you know, on the verge of becoming a genocide. And, you know, I guess usually people say around 100,000 is what you would count as a genocide, and so depending on which estimates you believe, like, we could already be there, but it's not looking good.
Yeah, there's a notable American observer, a man of a great deal of integrity, who gets very angry with me for using the figures that I do, the conservative figures that we do. Recently, I was speaking to an American journalist, and this guy said to me, you know, the reason you've only been attacked this much and not that much, you know, a great deal more, is because you've used these really conservative statistics, and you've been able to kind of hide behind them. You know, people can't really dispute you if you're using the very lowest numbers. Anyway, this chap, the observer who gets angry with me, says that I must stop using them because the figures have exceeded 100,000. And he makes a very good case, if you listen to him, an intelligent case, not an exaggerated hysterical propagandist case, for the fact that the murder of whites, the number of whites murdered, is over 125,000. We don't use those numbers. But he's not talking nonsense when he carefully justifies how he reaches those figures. Dr. Gregory Stanton predicted a genocide, in as much as there's some people listening to this who will say, no, he never ever predicted it. He did, in fact. He did. Because Dr. Gregory Stanton made it clear that this onslaught upon the whites was deliberate and orchestrated. He gave a speech in 2012 at the Transvaal Agricultural Union. And if anybody who's listening to this watches that speech, they'll understand. He made it very clear that from all of his years of expertise, speaking as a liberal, by the way, and an anti-apartheid activist, the fact remains that he had the integrity, the goodness of character, the decency to honestly say that this is a coordinated effort, and he implied that it originated with our government. Now, you may be interested to know, Matthew, that some weeks ago there was a spontaneous demonstration against farm murders and rapes and the killing of whites across South Africa, and it was called Black Monday, and everybody wore a black t-shirt. And shortly after that, our Minister of Defense conducted an interview which was broadcast on our national television. You know, we don't have like the USA private television stations, ABC, NBC, CBS. We have a national state-owned broadcaster, much like the BBC of the United Kingdom of Great Britain. And so it was broadcast in that, and our Minister of Defense said that if white people protest like that again, in other words, peacefully against rape and murder, we didn't burn any buses like all other protests in South Africa. We didn't burn down any universities. We didn't burn down a city hall. We didn't rape anybody in alleyways. We didn't do anything except peacefully demonstrate. She said if it happens one more time, the whites of South Africa will cause a genocide upon themselves. Paradigm did not generate this self-hatred from within. If you look carefully, you'll observe that it was imposed from without. It wasn't from within our culture that we started to say, you know what? You know what the problem is? We don't hate ourselves enough. The sociology and anthropology professors who initiated this phenomenon were, ironically, not our people. I think of Franz Boas and Margaret Mead and others. It's a very sensitive thing that I'm touching on now. But if you look closely at the evidence, I'm not talking about the allegation, the sentiment, or the emotion. I'm not talking about what we would like it to be. I'm talking about the evidence, the facts, the reality, the substance. This kind of misleading was imposed upon us from without. And we fell for it. People started to tell us that we were really, really, really bad people. I'll give you an example. In the Mfecane Wars of the 1820s and 30s in South Africa, the black population of South Africa killed between 1/3 and 2/3 of itself. There is no similar comparison in the world. If any one of your readers, your listeners, I beg your pardon, wishes to contest that fact, please permit them to do so. They can send me an email. There is nothing like it in the world. Imagine 2/3, between 1/3 and 2/3, the most liberal sources claim 2/3, of every man, woman, and child in the black population of South Africa was murdered. In the Napoleonic Wars, the 30 Years' War, 100 Years' War, the War of the Spanish Succession, and so on and so forth. The average casualty rate was between 10 and 20% of the combatants. So maybe 5% of the population. Now we're talking between 33 and 66% of the population. Let's say it was 50%. We don't know such viciousness and such ferocity, whether you like it or you don't like what I'm saying, it's okay. This is alien in our culture and in our civilization. And yet, we are pilloried for apartheid, in which literally less than tens of thousands of people died. I'm not saying apartheid was a noble endeavor. I'm not saying that it's grand to be a second-class citizen as a black person. That's not what I'm saying. I am saying that people miss the point altogether. And we're very quick to hate ourselves as white people for stealing the apple and then making an excuse for the person who murders and rapes.
Yeah, we over here we call it virtue signaling, basically.
It doesn't matter what your sociology professor tells you. The whites in South Africa did whatever they did after between 1 and 2/3 of every black soul in South Africa was killed in the Mfecane Wars. Such a thing is unknown in any white conflict event in history. There is no other comparison. So don't tell me I'm worse. Because by your own standards and the standards of mathematics, I'm certainly better. I don't aspire to be better. I don't want to be better. I don't need to be better. I don't need to hate black people. But by your standards and the standards of mathematics, I say to you that I am not guilty of the crimes that others are guilty of.
Very briefly, South Africa held universal elections for the first time on the 27th of April 1994. So we've had 23 years of democracy. During that period, the crime rate has skyrocketed in South Africa. We are sometimes referred to as the rape capital of the world. Our murder rate is astonishingly high, and particularly the rape and murder of white people on farms, that is to say farmers, is beyond most people's comprehension. To illustrate the point for you, South Africa is a violent society, so it's to be expected that South African policemen, that they're attacked often and they die often. The rate of murder of South African policemen is amongst the very highest in the whole world. But it is just more than twice as dangerous to be a South African farmer. Now that to most people is incredible. It's a statistic that you almost don't expect people to believe because it's not believable. But it's a fact that the murder of white farmers in South Africa is double the rate of murder of policemen, which indicates for you how severe things are on a crime level. Coupled with that, yes, there has been a steady pace. If you look at the statistics, you can see that shortly after the 1994 elections, once people realized that the government would condone or tolerate murder and rape in a way that hadn't previously been tolerated, they found their self-confidence, and they set about it with greater eagerness. And you can see in the statistics a steady upward trend to levels that would not be accepted anywhere else in the world. Dr. Gregory Stanton of Genocide Watch in Washington, D.C., who, by the way, is a noted liberal who was an anti-apartheid activist, in other words, not a natural ally of conservatives such as ourselves. Dr. Gregory Stanton visited South Africa in 2012, and following that visit, there are two things worth mentioning. Firstly, he placed white South Africans, all white South Africans, in the final phase of his measuring tool before all-out genocide. And even we were astonished to hear that. And he explained how the system works And he said, I genuinely believe that you are being set up for a genocide. Now, Dr. Gregory Stanton of Genocide Watch in Washington, D.C., is the man who predicted the Rwanda genocide a year before it happened, but a year in advance. In other words, he wasn't saying 12 months prior that it's going to happen tomorrow. He was saying, this thing is going to happen in about a year's time. And it did. So he's an acknowledged expert. And he's saying that we are on the cusp of a genocide. Furthermore, he said in an interview shortly after his visit, the worst thing about what I've seen is that it's clear to me that this is being orchestrated. In other words, that the murder of white people by black people, which has now reached, I'm not speaking of the farms, I'm speaking generally, of the whites in the population of about 4.6 to 4.8 million. Nobody's sure because our Department of Statistics is not mathematically competent. And it's well known that they sort of mess it up every time. But between 4.6 4.8 million white people is just past the 74,000 mark. I spoke to an American scholar 2 weeks ago who said that he's positive that the number is closer to 120,000. And I said to him, well, you know, I don't want to say that in interviews because it's not consistent with most of the research. And he gave me his research, and I have to say that it was fairly persuasive. He's not an idiot, and he's done a very good job of attempting to ascertain the number of murders. Now, nobody knows the correct number because some years ago, the Minister of Safety and Security, that is to say police, justice, jails, the correctional system, penitentiaries, and so on, stood up in Parliament following a barrage of criticism of how the government is handling crime. Yes, the people who were complaining were necessarily white newspapers or predominantly white newspapers and political observers and so on. He said, if people don't like the crime in South Africa, they should leave. Now, this is the attitude of the government. Shortly after that, the government adopted a policy of not releasing statistics by race. In other words, there's no way to know how many people have been murdered. We know for certain that it's a minimum of 74,000. That is to say, white people murdered by black people. And as I say, there's an American scholar who presented, certainly to me, a very persuasive argument that it's closer to 125,000.
Wow.
It makes you think. The economy is going to pieces. Unemployment has reached almost 40%. Again, it's a statistic that we don't expect people to believe because it's unbelievable, but we'll tell you what is the truth, and people can verify it for themselves and see that generally the statistics that we quote are conservative. If we err on the side of caution and conservatism all the time, it helps us to not to get into trouble. But they'll see even more severe statistics than that, and the world media doesn't want to acknowledge that it's fast heading towards being a basket case because it's going to make them look like twits.